The ship screamed through Earth's atmosphere like a dying star. Commander Zerathix felt every bone in her forearm shake as her vessel broke apart around her. The Starfire's edge had been her home for 8 years, but now it was nothing more. Been burning metal falling toward an unknown world. She pressed her lower right hand against the bleeding wound in her crystalline chest armor. Blue light leaked from the cracks, the same blue that flowed through every Velani warrior's body. Her people called it life essence, but right now it felt more like death seeping away. Drop by drop dot the control panel sparked and went dark. Emergency. Lights bathed everything in red. Through the cracked view screen, she could see green land rushing up to meet her. Trees and mountains stretched as far as her eyes could see. This world looked peaceful, nothing like the burned battlefields she had called home for the last 6 years. The impact threw her against the bulkhead. Her upper left arm snapped with a sound like breaking glass. Pain shot through her body as her crystalline bones shattered. The ship groaned and tilted. Then everything went quiet except for the hiss of escaping air and the crackle of fires. Zerathix tried to stand, but fell immediately. Her lower left arm hung useless at her side, bent at an impossible angle. Every breath sent sharp pain through her chest, where her armor had cracked. She could taste copper in her mouth, though she knew Velani blood was blue, not red. Through the smoke, she could see a hole torn in the ship's hull. Sunlight streamed through it, warm and yellow, so different from the harsh white light of her homeworld's twin suns. She had to get out before the fuel cells exploded. With her 2 working arms, she dragged herself across the tilted deck. Trees outside were green and full, their leaves moving gently in a breeze that carried strange scents. Sweet air filled her lungs as she pulled herself through the wreckage. Her people had always said other worlds smelled wrong, but this place smelled clean and alive. She collapsed in the soft grass 20 meters from her ship. Above her, white. Clouds drifted across a blue sky. She had seen thousands of worlds, but none quite like this one. The gravity felt lighter than home, and the air was thick with moisture. Birds called from the trees, their songs unfamiliar, but somehow comforting. Her communicator was broken, crushed in the crash. Even if it worked, who would she call? Her squadron was dead, destroyed 3 days ago when they tried to hold the line. At Korak's prime, 400 good warriors, gone because she made the wrong choice. She had ordered them to stand and fight when she should have ordered a retreat. The memory hit her harder than the crash. Captain Veltar had questioned her orders. He was young but smart, and he had been right. The Korthic forces were too strong, their position too exposed. But she was the commander, and pride had made her stubborn. Now Veltar was dead, along with everyone else who had trusted her judgment. Zerathix closed her eyes and let the warm sun touch her face. Maybe it was better this way. She would die on this quiet world, far from the war that had taken everything from her. Her broken bones ached, and she could feel her life essence still leaking from the cracks in her armor. Soon it would be over. The sound of footsteps made her open her eyes. A creature was walking toward her through the trees. It stood on 2 legs like a Velani, but was smaller and covered in soft skin instead of crystal. Its hair was dark, and its eyes were brown and kind. It wore simple clothes and carried a pack on its back. The creature stopped when it saw her, its eyes growing wide. For a moment, neither of them moved. Zerathix waited for it to run or attack. Most species feared the Velani, especially wounded ones. A hurt warrior was often more dangerous than a healthy one, but this creature did neither. Instead, it dropped its pack and approached slowly, hands raised where she could see them. It spoke in a language she did not understand, but its voice was gentle and calm. When it knelt beside her, she could see concern in its eyes. The creature examined her wounds without touching her. It pulled items from its pack and began working on her injuries with careful hands. It cleaned the blue essence from her armor and wrapped her broken arms with soft material. Every movement was gentle, as if it understood that she was in great pain. She tried to speak, to tell it that she was dying, and there was no point in helping her. But the words came out in her own language, and the creature could not understand. Instead, it just continued working, humming a soft tune that somehow made the pain feel less sharp. When it finished with her arms, the creature looked at her chest armor. The cracks there were deep, and blue light still leaked out. The creature frowned and pulled out a strange device. It pressed buttons and pointed it at her wounds. Numbers appeared on a small screen, and the creature nodded as if it understood what they meant. From its pack came more supplies. The creature mixed powders and liquids in a small container, creating a paste that it carefully applied to the cracks in her armor. To her surprise, the bleeding slowed and then stopped. The paste hardened and sealed the wounds, holding her armor together. The creature sat back and looked at its work. Bennett looked at her face and spoke again in that strange language. This time she thought she heard a question in its voice. It pointed to itself and said what sounded like a name, Jake. Then it pointed to her and raised its eyebrows. She understood. It wanted to know her name. Using her one good upper arm, she pointed to herself and said, Zerathix. The sound came out rough and painful, but the creature smiled and repeated it back to her, getting it almost right. Jake stood and gathered his supplies. Then he pointed to her and then to the trees, making gestures with his hands. He wanted her to come with him. She shook her head, too weak to move, but Jake was not giving up. He knelt down and carefully helped her sit up, supporting her weight with surprising strength for such a small creature. Step by painful step, Jake helped her walk away from her crashed ship. Behind them, smoke still rose from the wreckage of the Starfire's edge. Ahead, through the trees, she could see a small building with a strange peaked roof. Smoke rose from a pipe on top, and warm light glowed in the windows. For the first time in years, Zerathix felt something other than pain and guilt. She felt hope. The cabin door opened before Jake could knock. A woman with short brown hair and worried eyes looked out, then gasped when she saw Zerathix leaning heavily against Jake's shoulder. The woman stepped backward, her hand flying to her mouth. Lucy. It's okay, Jake said softly. She's hurt. She needs help. Lucy stared at Zerathix's 4 arms and crystalline skin that caught the light like broken glass. Blue essence still seeped from small cracks in her armor, glowing faintly in the dim light. Her alien features were sharp and angular, nothing like any creature Lucy had ever seen. What is she? Lucy whispered. I don't know, Jake replied. But she's dying if we don't help her. Lucy looked at her husband's face and saw the same expression he had worn when he found injured animals in the woods. Jake had always been a healer, even during his years as a soldier. She stepped aside and let them enter. The cabin's main room was warm and comfortable, with a stone fireplace and soft furniture. Jake helped Zerathix onto the couch, being careful not to jar her broken arms. She looked around the room with large eyes that seemed to take in every detail. I'll get the medical kit, Lucy said, her voice steadier now. She had been a nurse before they moved to the mountains, and old training was taking over. The big one from the basement. Jake nodded and knelt beside Zerathix. He pulled out a small device and held it near her wounds. The numbers on its screen were different from before, but still not good. We need to get fluids into her, he told Lucy when she returned with supplies. She's lost a lot of blood, or whatever that blue stuff is. They worked together in quiet efficiency. Lucy set up in 4 line while Jake cleaned and redressed Zarathix's wounds. Their patient watched everything they did, her eyes following their movements with intelligent awareness. When Lucy approached with the 4-needle, Zarathix tensed. "It's okay," Jake said gently, though he knew she could not understand his words. He rolled up his own sleeve and showed her the small scar from his own recent blood test. Then he pointed to the 4-bag and made drinking motions with his hand. Zarathix studied his face for a long moment, then slowly extended her one good upper arm. Lucy inserted the needle with practiced skill, and clear fluid began flowing into Zarathix's body. Within minutes, some color returned to her crystalline skin. Over the next few hours, they took turns watching over their unexpected guest. Jake brought blankets when she shivered, and Lucy offered water when she seemed thirsty. They discovered that she could drink human water, though she made a face at the taste. When evening came, Zarathix was strong enough to sit up. She pointed to herself and said her name again, then pointed to Jake and repeated his name back to him. When she pointed to Lucy, Jake said his wife's name clearly. "Lucy," Zarathix repeated, the word coming out with a strange accent but recognizable. Lucy smiled for the first time since they brought the alien warrior home. "That's right, Lucy." Jake pulled out a pad of paper and began drawing simple pictures. A house, a tree, water, food. Each time he drew something, he would say the word and point to the real object if it was nearby. Zarathix watched with growing interest, then took the pencil with her good hand and began drawing her own pictures. Her first drawing was clearly a spaceship, though it looked nothing like the vehicles in human science fiction movies. The second was a star map with strange symbols. The third made both Jake and Lucy lean closer. It showed stick figures with 4 arms, fighting stick figures with what looked like claws and fangs. "War," Jake said quietly, pointing to the drawing. Zarathix nodded and drew more figures. Many 4-armed figures lying still while the clawed ones stood over them. She drew herself standing alone among the fallen bodies, then covered the drawing with her hand and looked away. Lucy reached out and gently touched Zarathix's good hand. "I'm sorry," she said, not caring that the words could not be understood. The tone was enough. Jake went to the mantel above the fireplace and took down a framed photograph. It showed a young man in military uniform, smiling at the camera. Jake's son, killed in action 2 years ago. He showed the picture to Zarathix, then pointed to himself, and Lucy. Understanding passed between them like a shared language of grief. Zarathix looked at the photograph for a long time, then gently touched Jake's face with one finger. In that moment, species and language barriers meant nothing. Loss was loss, and pain was pain. The days that followed fell into a gentle routine. Lucy would check Zarathix's wounds each morning, changing bandages and monitoring her healing. Jake worked on building communication between them, creating a simple vocabulary of gestures and drawings that they could all understand. They learned that Zarathix had been a military commander, responsible for many soldiers. They learned that she blamed herself for their deaths. They learned that she had expected to die on Earth and had been surprised to find help instead of abandonment. In return, Jake and Lucy shared their own story. Through pictures and patient repetition, they told her about their son, about Jake's time as a soldier and medic, about the nightmares that still sometimes woke them both in the dark hours before dawn. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Zarathix began making soft sounds that were clearly not words. Jake and Lucy listened, recognizing the rhythm as something like music. It was a sad song, full of longing and loss, but also beautiful in its alien way. When the song ended, Lucy began humming a lullaby she had once sung to her son. Jake joined in with his deeper voice, and soon all 3 of them were making music together, each in their own way, but somehow in harmony. That night, Zarathix slept without the restless movements that had marked her previous nights. Jake and Lucy found her in the morning still peaceful, her breathing steady and calm. "She's healing," Lucy said as they watched their guest sleep. "Not just her body," Jake replied. "She's starting to heal inside too." Lucy nodded. She had seen the same look in Jake's eyes when he first came home from war. The hollow stare of someone who had seen too much death, lost too many friends. It had taken years for that look to fade from her husband's face. "How long do you think she'll stay?" Lucy asked. Jake looked out the window at the forest where he had first found the crashed alien ship. Government people would come eventually, once someone noticed the unusual readings or the burned crater in the woods. But for now, in this quiet place far from any city, they had time. "As long as it takes," he said simply. That afternoon, Jake found Zarathix standing in the garden behind the cabin. She was looking at Lucy's flowers with her head tilted in curiosity. When she saw him watching, she pointed to the bright red roses and made a questioning sound. "Flowers," Jake said, touching one of the blooms gently. "Beautiful." Zarathix repeated the word, then knelt carefully and smelled the rose. Her face changed, showing something like wonder. She looked up at Jake and smiled, the first real smile he had seen from her. In that moment, Jake knew that saving this broken warrior had been the right thing to do. Not because of any grand purpose or destiny, but simply because it was what humans did. They helped those who needed help, even when those in need looked nothing like themselves. 3 weeks after the crash, Zarathix could walk without help. Her broken arms were healing, though the lower left one would never be quite the same. Jake had fashioned a simple brace that let her use it for light work, and she was grateful for his skill with tools and medicine. She spent her mornings helping Lucy in the garden, learning the names of earth plants and flowers. Her afternoons were with Jake, who showed her human books filled with pictures of their history. The images fascinated and troubled her in equal measure. Humans, she learned, had fought terrible wars among themselves. Cities burned in photographs. From something called World War II, Jake showed her pictures of soldiers who looked young and scared, not so different from the Vellani warriors she had led into battle. "We learned," Jake said one afternoon, pointing to more recent pictures of humans working together, building things instead of destroying them. "Not fast enough, but we learned." Zarathix traced her finger over a photograph of human peacekeepers, helping refugees. "Vellani no learn," she said in the broken English she was slowly picking up. "Only fight, always fight." Jake showed her another book, this one about treating soldiers who came home from war with wounds that could not be seen. The pictures showed humans talking to doctors, working with their hands, learning to live with memories that would not fade. "You understand," Zarathix said, looking at Jake with new recognition. "You have—" She touched her chest where her heart would be, and her head. "Scars," Jake said gently. "Inside scars." She nodded. Over the following days, Jake taught her the breathing exercises that helped him when the nightmares came. Lucy showed her how to work with clay, shaping it with her hands until the motion calmed her mind. They did not try to erase her pain, but they gave her tools to carry it without drowning. One morning, Zarathix found Jake splitting wood behind the cabin. His movements were efficient and strong, each swing of the axe perfectly controlled. She watched him work, remembering her own training with Vellani combat blades. "Teach me," she said when he paused to rest. Jake looked at her healing arms. "You sure you're ready?" She nodded firmly. Jake showed her how to hold the axe, how to read the grain of the wood, how to let the tool's weight do most of the work. Her first attempts were clumsy, but she was a warrior and learned quickly. Soon she was splitting logs with steady rhythm. using her 3 good arms to guide the axe while her healing arm supported her stance. The work felt good, purposeful in a way that battle never had. She was building instead of destroying, creating warmth for the home that had sheltered her. "Feel better?" Jake asked when they finished the morning's work. "Yes," she said, wiping sweat from her crystalline brow. "Strong here." She touched her chest, not just body. That evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Lucy asked the question that had been growing in all their minds. "What will you do when you're fully healed?" Zarathix stared into the flames for a long time. "Before, I want die," she said slowly. "Shame too heavy. Friends dead because of me. And now?" Jake prompted gently. "Now, ... Ugh." She struggled for the words in English, then switched to gestures mixed with her own language. "Now I see different way. Humans show me." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the forest where her ship had crashed. "Vellani thinks strength is never break, never fall. But humans show me real strength is get up after fall. Help others get up too." Over the next few days, Zarathix began too. Change in ways that went beyond her healing body. She laughed at Lucy's jokes, even when she did not fully understand them. She helped Jake repair a broken fence, working beside him with quiet contentment. She learned to cook simple human meals, fascinated by flavors that were completely new. To her, one afternoon, while Lucy was in town getting supplies, Jake found Zarathix standing over his old military equipment. He kept his combat gear in a closet, not because he wanted to use it again, but because throwing it away felt like betraying the soldiers who had not made it home. "You were a good fighter," she said, examining his tactical vest and helmet. "Good. Enough to survive," Jake replied. "Not good enough to save everyone I wanted to save." She looked at him with understanding that needed no translation. Same feeling. Jake pulled out his old rifle, checking that it was unloaded before handing it to her. She examined it with professional interest, noting the scratches and wear marks that told stories of battles fought and survived. "Different from Vellani weapons," she said, "but smart design. Want to see how it works?" Jake asked. They spent the afternoon at an improvised shooting range. Jake set up behind the cabin. Zarathix was a natural marksman, adapting quickly to human weapons despite their different design. In return, she showed Jake some Vellani combat forms, movements that were both deadly and beautiful. "Your people fight with honor," Jake observed as he watched her demonstrate a complex defensive pattern. "Too much honor, maybe," she replied. "Honor make us proud. Pride make us stupid." Jake understood. He had seen good soldiers die because they were too proud to retreat, too stubborn to change tactics when the situation called for it. War rewarded flexibility, not just courage. Their peaceful afternoon was interrupted by a sound that made Zarathix freeze in terror. High above them, something was descending through the clouds. It was not an Earth aircraft, but something sleek and predatory that moved with purpose. "Korthik," she whispered, the word carrying all the fear and hatred of 6 years of war. Jake grabbed his rifle and scanned the sky. The alien ship was small, probably a scout or strike craft. It circled their area once, then landed in the forest near where Zarathix's ship had crashed. "How many?" Jake asked, already moving toward the cabin to get more weapons and warn Lucy. "Scout. Ship, maybe 6 warriors," Zarathix said, her voice tight with old fear. "They come for me." Jake stopped and looked at her. 3 weeks ago, she had been a broken warrior waiting to die. Now she stood straighter, her eyes clear and determined. The healing was not complete, but it had been enough to give her back her strength. "Can you fight?" he asked. She smiled, and for the first time, it was not the gentle smile she wore while working in the garden. This was the smile of a Vellani commander who had survived 6 years of war. "With humans beside me? Yes, I can fight." Jake nodded and handed her one of his spare rifles. "Then let's teach these Korthik something about Earth hospitality." As they prepared for battle, Jake felt something he had not experienced since leaving the military. He felt like he was fighting for something that mattered, protecting something worth defending. Beside him, Zarathix checked her weapon with movements that were both alien and familiar. The war had followed her to Earth, but she was no longer the sane broken warrior who had crawled from her crashed ship. She had learned something from humans that her own people had forgotten. She had learned that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is accept help, and that healing makes you stronger, not weaker. Outside, the Korthik warriors were moving through the forest, hunting for their prey. They expected to find a wounded Villani commander hiding in shame on a primitive world. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when Villani honor met human determination, when alien military skill combined with Earth's fierce protection of family and home. The Korthik moved through the forest like shadows given flesh. 6 warriors, each one engineered for killing, their natural armor gleaming black in the dappled sunlight. They followed the energy trail from Zarathix's crashed ship, expecting to find a wounded Villani commander cowering in some cave, or ruins. Jake watched them through his rifle scope from a position Lucy had suggested, a rocky outcrop that gave him clear fields of fire in 3 directions. His wife had always been the tactical thinker in their family, and her years as a military spouse had taught her to think like a soldier when necessary. Zarathix crouched behind a fallen log 30 meters to his left, her movements silent despite her size. The weeks of healing had returned much of her natural grace, and Jake could see why the Villani were feared throughout the galaxy. She was a predator, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lucy was in the cabin, coordinating with the sheriff's department and anyone else who might believe her story about alien invaders. Jake doubted help would arrive in time, but Lucy had always been thorough about backup plans. The lead Korthik paused at the edge of the clearing where the cabin sat. It was larger than the others, with scars that spoke of many battles. Its head turned slowly as it scanned the peaceful scene, probably wondering why there were no obvious defensive positions. That was the first mistake Jake had hoped they would make. The Korthik were used to fighting desperate battles against dug-in enemies. They were not used to fighting on someone else's home ground, against opponents who had had time to prepare. The lead warrior gestured to its companions, and they began to spread out in a standard search pattern. Jake smiled grimly. Standard patterns were predictable, and predictable enemies were dead enemies. He keyed the small radio Lucy had given him before leaving for town. "Zara, they're moving into position. You ready?" "Ready," came her voice, steady and calm. "Remember, aim for joints. In armor, neck and wrists." Jake had already learned that lesson during their afternoon of shared tactical knowledge. Human weapons could penetrate Korthik armor, but only at specific weak points. Zarathix had spent an hour teaching him exactly where those points were. The first Korthik died without knowing what hit it. Jake's shot took it through the neck joint, and it dropped silently into the tall grass. The others immediately went into defensive positions, scanning for the source of the attack. Zarathix rose from her hiding spot like an avenging spirit. Her war cry echoed through the forest, a sound that combined grief and rage and something new that Jake recognized as hope. Her rifle spoke twice, and 2 more Korthik fell before they could react to her position. The remaining 3 warriors charged toward her, position within human speed. Jake shifted his aim and took down the trailing one, but the other 2 reached Zarathix's cover before he could fire again. What followed was unlike any battle Jake had ever seen. Zarathix moved with fluid grace, using her 3 good arms to reload and fire while using her healing arm for balance and position. The Korthik were strong and fast, but they had not expected to face a Valani commander who fought with both warrior skill and human tactical thinking. She used the terrain the way Jake had taught her, making the enemy come to her through narrow approaches where only one could attack at a time. She used covering fire the way he had shown her, keeping the enemy's heads down while she moved to better positions. But it was more than just tactics that made the difference. Zarathix fought with a purpose she had not felt in months. She was not fighting to die gloriously or to wash away shame with blood. She was fighting to protect the people who had given her a reason to live again. The fourth Korthik managed to get close enough to strike with its clawed hands. Zarathix rolled away from the attack, came up firing, and put 3 rounds through its chest armor at point-blank range. The warrior fell backward into the stream that ran past the cabin. Jake was already moving toward the last enemy when Lucy's voice crackled over the radio. More contacts coming in from the south. Looks like a backup team. Jake cursed under his breath. 3 more Korthik were approaching through the trees, and these ones looked even more dangerous than the first group. Their armor was newer, their weapons more advanced. "Zara, we've got company," he called out. She appeared beside him with the silent grace of a hunting cat. Her crystalline skin was scratched from the fight, and blue essence leaked from small cuts, but her eyes were bright with the joy of battle. "More targets," she said with satisfaction. Jake looked at her with amazement. A month ago, she had been dying from despair and shame. Now she stood ready to face impossible odds with a smile on her alien face. "You realize we're probably going to die here," he told her. "Maybe," she agreed, "but we die fighting for something good. That makes difference." The new group of Korthik moved more carefully than the first, having learned from the fate of their advance team. They used proper military tactics, advancing by bounds with covering fire, checking their corners and watching for ambushes. But they made one crucial mistake. They assumed they were fighting typical human resistance, not a battle-hardened Velani commander who had learned to combine her people's warrior traditions with human adaptability. Jake and Zarathix had used their brief respite to reposition themselves in the cabin itself, turning Lucy's peaceful home into a fortress. They had moved furniture to create firing positions, opened windows to provide multiple angles of attack, and prepared escape routes in case they needed to fall back. When the Korthik assault began, it met a defense unlike anything they had encountered before. Jake's rifle found targets with mechanical precision, each shot carefully aimed at weak points in alien armor. Zarathix moved through the cabin like a deadly ghost, appearing at different windows to fire before disappearing again. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Furniture splintered under alien weapons fire. Windows shattered and walls cracked. The peaceful cabin became a war zone, but slowly, inevitably, the Korthik began to fall. Their superior individual strength meant nothing against combined human and Velani tactics. Their advanced weapons could not compensate for fighting enemies who knew the ground and had prepared for battle. The last Korthik warrior made it to the cabin's front door before Jake's final shot dropped it on the threshold. Silence fell over the forest, broken only by the sound of distant sirens as human authorities finally arrived. Jake and Zarathix sat in the wreckage of what had once been a quiet mountain home, both of them breathing heavily from exertion and adrenaline. Around them lay the bodies of alien warriors who had expected an easy hunt and found a prepared defense instead. "We did it," Jake said, hardly believing it himself. Zarathix looked around at the destruction, then at her human friend, who had stood beside her in battle. "We did it together," she corrected. "Alone, both dead. Together, both alive." Outside, they could hear vehicles approaching and voices calling in human languages. Soon there would be questions and explanations, and all the complications that came with first contact between species. But for now, in this moment of quiet after battle, Jake and Zarathix sat together in companionable silence. They had faced the enemy and won, not through superior firepower or numbers, but through something the Korthik could not understand or counter. They had won through friendship, through the simple human act of helping someone in need and receiving help in return. They had won because healing made you stronger, not weaker, and because sometimes the best way to honor the dead was to fight for the living. The Vellani delegation arrived 6 weeks after the battle, their massive ship casting shadows over the mountain valley. They came expecting to find the wreckage of a failed reconnaissance and perhaps the body of a disgraced commander. Instead, they found something that challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare and honor. Admiral Kethvor stepped off the transport shuttle with the bearing of a warrior who had never known defeat. His crystalline armor gleamed with the awards of 50 successful campaigns, and his 4 arms moved with the controlled precision of a master combatant. Behind him came a dozen of the Empire's finest officers, all prepared to investigate how Commander Zarathix had not only survived, but somehow managed to destroy an entire Korthik strike force. They found her in the rebuilt cabin, working alongside the humans Jake and Lucy to repair the damage from the battle. She wore simple earth clothes instead of armor, and her movements had a peace about them that none of the Vellani officers had ever seen in a veteran commander. "Commander Zarathix," Admiral Kethvor said formally, "you will explain how you came to abandon your duties and hide among these primitives." Zarathix set down the board she had been measuring and looked at her superior officer with calm eyes. "I did not abandon my duties, Admiral. I discovered what they truly should be." "They..." Admiral's expression hardened. "You allowed your entire battle group to be destroyed. You fled from honorable death in battle. You consorted with aliens who have no understanding of Vellani ways." "Yes," Zarathix agreed simply. "And in doing so, I learned something that all our warrior traditions never taught me." Jake stepped forward from where he had been working on the new window frames. He moved with the confident ease of someone who had faced alien warriors in battle and emerged victorious. Behind him, Lucy appeared in the doorway, her medical bag in her hand and a look of professional interest in her eyes. "Admiral Zarathix continued, may I present Jake and Lucy Martinez, the humans who saved my life and taught me what real strength means." Admiral Kethvor studied the 2 humans with the calculating gaze of a military professional. He had read the battle reports, seen the evidence of how 9 Korthik warriors had died in this peaceful valley. These soft-looking creatures had somehow helped the broken Vellani commander defeat elite enemy forces. "You claim these humans taught you about strength?" he asked, skepticism clear in his voice. "Watch," Zarathix said simply. She led the delegation to the training area Jake had helped her set up behind the cabin. There, she demonstrated the combat techniques she had learned, showing how human tactical flexibility combined with Vellani warrior traditions to create something new and powerful. But more than the physical skills, she showed them the mental techniques Jake had taught her for dealing with combat stress. She showed them Lucy's methods for helping warriors process trauma and guilt. She showed them how healing made fighters stronger, not weaker. "Your people fight with great honor," she told the Admiral as they watched her work through a complex combat form. "But honor without wisdom is just pride, and pride